Okay, I'm excited for, I think, our fourth community leader interview. I'm just gonna go ahead and let my friend introduce herself. Take it away, Sam.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So, my name is Sam Castro. I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona, although I am from the Bay Area. Still have family that live out there. I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion at the behavioral health agency that I work at called Via del Sol. And I'm excited to say that I'm the first one to be able to have this role. Came out to Arizona to pursue my education and career in LGBTQ advocacy specifically, and that's expanded into my passion for mental health and human rights. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You will be the first, but you will not be the last.
I hope not.
Um,
Definitely.
so tell us about as much as you would like to share about your childhood and like your experiences growing up in the city.
Yeah, definitely. Fun fact, so I claim the Bay, and everybody's going to give me backlash for this. I was actually born in Queens, so I was an East Coast baby. That's where my family immigrated to from the Philippines. I claim the Bay because that's where my family moved um, to find more inclusivity and to just be able to assimilate their culture into their everyday values and jobs. So moving to San Francisco was really one, it was a culture shock at first, but then it honestly felt like home and made sense. I went to Marina Middle School, so I was a penguin. And then after that, I went to George Washington High School, where I became an Eagle. Um, and yeah, growing up in the city, honestly, there was so much to learn. And I think that inherently living in a city with so many people and so many different institutions and opportunities, um, it's really easy to learn a lot without necessarily learning a lot, but you have that a lot of heavy influences on your life and on your culture and on your identity. So, especially being in San Francisco during my most important like adolescent years, I really felt that that's what helped me find my drive and my motivation for what it is that I want to do now. Um, I grew up, well, first I lived in the Fillmore district. Um, so when I went to Marina, I took the 22 Fillmore to school every day. And then we moved to the Richmond district of San Francisco. And currently my parents and my brother still live there. Um, it's kind of funny because if you asked anybody from Phoenix or even maybe from the Bay Area, most people would assume that I'm still there most of the time because I tend to visit my family a lot. But it is still my home and I still my city.
Awesome. I love that. You touched on this a little bit, but
hmm
what do you do for work and
Yeah,
how have your experiences played into that?
absolutely. So currently, I just assumed the role of director of equity and inclusion at my agency. As I mentioned, it is the first position of the like at my organization. I would say that Phoenix is a little behind in comparison to California when it comes to talking about culture and diversity and inclusion, but we're definitely working towards that. So I'm excited that I work for an agency that wants to implement changes such as this and wants to be able to build that self-awareness and make changes not only for our patients, but for our staff. Um, so I had started at this agency 3 years ago. I started as a clinical case manager. So I work a lot in mental health, crisis, a lot with youth and families. Um, I actually was able to start our LGBTQ program at my agency. I called it Live Out Loud, and it's still currently running right now. And we've been able to expand it, so that's exciting. Um, but yeah, a lot of my experience has been in trauma informed care, um, delivering cultural and equitable services for all our patients. And in creating this position with my organization, we wanted to ensure that we're not only serving the population that we opened for. So Vital Soul actually started as a behavioral health agency for the Latino population, because we are so close um, to Mexico, and having a lot of people who immigrate. We wanted to be able to serve that community, and because we share that passion for underserved communities, we want to make sure that we're encompassing all intersectionalities, and all Black, Indigenous, people of color, despite what their religion is, spirituality, socioeconomic status. We want to make sure that everybody has access to mental health support, especially in those communities where mental health can be stigmatized or not necessarily discussed. So I'm excited to be able to bridge the gap, and represent those communities that need that representation, and to bring my knowledge from growing up in a more liberal city and bringing it to Phoenix, and kind of merging the values and seeing how much we can flourish by doing that. So I would say I definitely got my drive for working with youth, through expanding and creating my LGBTQ group. Um, Funny talking about high school. Shout out to Miss Lucy. She was my high school counselor that supported me through, oh my gosh, so much. And she probably doesn't know it, but to this day, that was the reason that I initially wanted to become a counselor. And my idea of a counselor was a high school counselor, but through pursuing the career and like going through school and everything, I realized there was a whole mental health world that I was completely wanting to be a part of and wanting to pursue my passion in. And so now I'm currently pursuing my master's in clinical mental health counseling also.
I actually didn't know that, and I've known Sam for like more than 10 years now.
Yeah.
About to celebrate our 10-year high school reunion.
I
Wow,
know. It feels like 1 year, but you know.
that's insane. And if there's anything I've learned, it's like having a good high school counselor is like so rare, and it's just not something
Oh,
that
definitely. And yeah, I mean, it's during a period of time where, you're so adolescent development, you're so encapsulated with like your own perception and your own identity, and it's hard to see past what you're going through in that moment. And so, without Miss Lucy, it was really hard to even envision a future where I was going to college and getting a job, and doing all these things, because I felt like mental health wise I just wasn't there. So she definitely was a huge influence, and support for that, and definitely helped me in terms of a lot of like personal issues, like my coming out story, and just generally that overall socio emotional development that I was going through during high school.
wow, I totally did not know that. And I just
Hmm.
thank you so much for being so open about that, because I know that there are people that that'll help them in their journey, and that'll help them in their own little stories and their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was a lot of what the driving factor was in pursuing LGBTQ activism in general. Uh, when I lived in San Francisco, I struggled a lot with uh, internalized homophobia, just because I came from a very traditional Filipino Catholic culture. Um, and so with that, it's its own coming out process, and my parents had their own process. And as an adult, I understand that today, but as a kid, you don't always understand that. You just feel the rejection, or feel the negative feelings. So it's definitely important for LGBTQ youth, especially, to feel like they have that person that they can look up to, or even just have the visibility of LGBTQ successful adults, rather than just hearing about the disparities and the negativity and the stigma.
And when you come from a religious background, you tend to only hear the negative stuff.
Hmm.
And it takes a toll on you.
It
Absolutely.
does. It definitely skews your whole perception of self, your perception of the world. And so it can really be hard to make any kind of decisions or pursue anything if you're feeling like you are struggling with finding your own identity and then accepting your own identity.
Wow. Totally awesome, awesome, awesome. Back to the work that you're doing in Arizona. What are some of the most pressing issues that you see?
Whew. Well,
Or just maybe a couple or the ones, that you can.
you're like, give me a short list. No, I'm
Take
kidding.
your time, absolutely.
um, well, I think, I mean, the thing with Arizona and Phoenix specifically, because that's where I've been living for the past few years. I just think a lot of it is a lack of exposure and lack of education to other cultures. And so when you live in a place that essentially, everybody has the same values and looks the same way and eats the same food and has the same routines, anything outside of that seems so radical and seems so against the grain. And um, what I see in Phoenix, especially when I moved out here, was that there wasn't, if any, LGBTQ visibility when it came to advocacy in this matter. I would say that I know that of one organization, 1 in 10, that they're out here, but in comparison to other cities and what their resources are, it really wasn't huge out here. And so I encountered, through working with the population, I encountered going to high schools and presenting for LGBTQ youth and really hearing like, yeah, like I'm scared to go to school every day. Some people actually like drive past me and they follow me to school and they yell a lot of derogatory terms. And that's not something I necessarily grew up with. I had the privilege of living in an accepting city, and while I might have felt the negativity at first from family and them having to accept that, as a whole, I didn't feel culturally denied by my city. And so I saw that there was a need, especially within school systems. And that's kind of how it all started. Um, with LGBTQ advocacy, I started working with youth and in high schools. There was a huge disparity in terms of suicide ideation and mental health services for LGBTQ youth. And I noticed that through volunteering with different organizations. And that's what led me to be so passionate about queer mental health and bring LGBTQ services to the mental health world so that people who were experiencing these identity issues had a clinician that they could go to and talk about these things. Because how often is it that LGBTQ people, especially LGBTQ people of color, want to go to a doctor or want to go to a therapist or go to a psychiatrist, but it's too difficult to explain your walk of life and too difficult to explain your perception of things, especially with the cultural aspect. So yeah, overall, I would just say in Phoenix, some of the biggest issues would just be having more education and support around what really makes our communities thrive. So I would say definitely the education system, um, definitely LGBTQ and uh, Black, Indigenous, and people of color advocacy. That's super important. I think that when it comes to race, especially in Phoenix and Arizona, there's a huge divide. Uh, and a lot of people are not necessarily exposed to different cultures. And when you're not exposed to different cultures, naturally either you're turned off to it or it's hard for you to accept it. So I think that with us putting more money into education or more money into mental health services that are providing the resources and the tools that everybody needs to be able to be successful, the state would be able to look at things through a much different lens and through a much more collaborative lens than it has been. So I would definitely like to see less of a divide. And when I say divide, I know that sounds very broad, but I feel that there are several aspects in which there are divides when it comes to Phoenix. So, socioeconomic status, race, educational status, um, and just as we see in any other city, the districts with lesser money have poor success rates in schools, but I think that influencing our kids as young as they are and influencing them and empowering them to become successful adults is where it starts. But right now, with the lack of education and the lack of the state necessarily even talking about these issues, is a huge barrier. So it is really good that we have now become a blue city and a blue state for the first time in over 20 years. So that's really exciting. So I'm definitely hoping to see more change and more influential leaders that have a voice in the community and can share their side to supplement, a new experience for people in Phoenix.
Awesome, awesome. So you kind of already answered my next question,
Oh, I talk a
but
lot, I know.
but maybe just expand a little bit. Um, what's your vision for your role and the part that you play, like going forward 5, 10, 15 years from now? And
Yeah.
where do you see this, like, this movement? It's a movement that you're building. Like, where do you see this going? And what do you see happening?
So in my role, there's three aspects or three tiers to my role specifically that I will be in charge of overseeing. So there's the internal aspect, the clinical aspect. So how do we deliver our services to our patients? Are they inclusive? Are they equitable? Are they tying their culture in to treatment so that they feel that treatment is relatable, it's achievable, it's positive, and it's needed. And then there's also the external aspect of it. So the community building, how do we represent ourselves in the community? And while we do a great job as it is currently in terms of serving underserved populations, are we speaking to every single community? Does every community feel as accepted by us as we make it out to be? So the external aspect of it is getting our agency involved in different committees, getting involved in presenting at conferences, um, tabling at certain events, such I would really love to, table for Phoenix Pride and the Martin Luther King um, festival that they have in Phoenix. Obviously, right now it's COVID, so we've had to make accommodations. But the agency is definitely wanting to move forward in showing more visibility, and we're excited to have a person who is dedicated to this role hands-on. So the external aspect and the community involvement was something that different staff members took on as an essential, like a supplement to their role. And so eventually it kind of not necessarily died down, but there wasn't one sole person to make sure that these interventions were in place. So the external factor is just making sure that I'm out in the community and I'm representing us and I'm seeing what our community needs and bringing it back to the agency to see how we can improve. Um, the last piece is the community outreach. Um, and I sit on a Health Choice Diversity Council meeting right now, or council right now, and I'm excited to join a couple more here and there. But with that, I will be revamping our cultural competency plan, and that's something that is reviewed by our board and agreed on by our staff and the board of directors. So I am in charge of making edits to that, making sure that they're, still in alignment with our mission and vision, our overall core values. And then I also will be overseeing our equity and inclusion committee. And so that is comprised of different staff members from direct care level to admin, um, PCP. We are an integrated health clinic. So basically, anybody at our agency who is motivated to one, work on the cultural competency plan with me, and then also be part of this community partnership development. Showing our face in the community, and bridging those gaps between different agencies. But they'll also be part of the committee and then helping in delivering trainings for our staff, identifying what kind of trainings do we need. So do we need to talk about historical trauma and the way that it impacts staff and patients, because that's something that we experienced over the summer. Was there were so many things going on with the protesting, and out here we were protesting for Dion Johnson. He was killed in his car while he was asleep. um, so we were protesting for him. We were protesting for Breonna Taylor, but essentially with all of those things, our organization didn't want to be a performative ally. We didn't want to just sit back and say, hey, we support this movement without supporting this movement. So we're implementing policy changes. We're implementing, obviously, this new position. We are creating the Equity and Inclusion Committee that's going to meet monthly, and we want to deliver quarterly anti-Blackness and anti-racism trainings and discussions, because we also believe that it's important for our staff to be able to have a place where they express themselves when it comes to this, right? Because like I said, with the historical trauma piece, we have staff members like therapists and case managers who are giving services for people who are also struggling during the pandemic, but our staff also need to have that mental health support too. And that's something that a lot of people don't think about. So wraparound wise, that's definitely the last piece that is very much important. And so that's kind of how I see my role. I'm excited to be able to identify, okay, what trainings do we need for the staff, and then be able to deliver those. Be able to participate in conferences and collaborate and network with other agencies, and really come up with a cultural competency plan that um, is better than what we've had before and can adapt and address the issues that we're dealing with in current day society.
Wow. So it definitely sounds like not only do you have your work cut out for you, but like exactly, at least you have a plan going forward, and that's so awesome to hear.
Yeah, definitely. I have a plan. I think my biggest struggle is that I am an impatient person. So naturally, so naturally with change and with policy, especially with people wanting to see change instantly, one thing that I have to remind myself is that, with implementing changes and with being the sole person in this position, some of these changes essentially take time, and that's why it's important to have that sole person dedicated to it. So I just need to be patient, but I'm definitely excited about where it's all going, and I love my job. I get to advocacy is a difficult job, and it's a difficult thing to carry on your shoulders, especially when you are working somewhere where it's kind of twofold for advocacy and mental health. But I think that because I have such a deep passion for it, and I can see that my agency also has that passion, we're able to do good things, and I think that we'll be able to accomplish a lot.
You can't rush progress. You can't rush progress, but
No, you can't. You
we
can't.
have seen, you touched on this earlier, um, Arizona turning blue. So my next question is, do you have hope in the new administration? We've been called the biggest equality, can't think of the terms, but most equal representation.
Mhm.
in an administration in years. This has been the most pro-equality, that's what I'm trying to say, administration in years. Um, do you have hope going forward for where this movement is going and government
I
wise?
definitely do. I think that it's like we said, with change, it definitely takes time. So I think that we will naturally experience backlash in the sense that there will always be people that say, oh, things haven't changed, and things are going to stay the same. And there's no point in trying to change things because we can't change things. Um, but I think that just the way we saw our country come together this year, like we watched it fall apart and that was really hard. But in the time that we needed to, we watched it come together in the way that we needed to as well. And while the battle is not over and it's going to be a continuous battle, it's never linear. So, and I think that's something that people need to understand as well is that, we can take two steps backwards sometimes and it doesn't feel good. Um, but it's about how we recover from that because recovery in itself is never linear. So I definitely think that there is hope in the new administration. I think that in order to progress, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom first. And while we need patience and while we need to continue that motivation, and instill it in other people, I think that we could essentially have a lot of change and hope in the new administration. I see a lot more representation from diverse leaders, and that's really great. That's showing me that people are taking advantage of their rights. They're voting. They're looking into these different representatives, and that's important. I think that we were in a climate last year where everybody was concerned not only for their health but their safety in the country in general, and it's really changed everybody's perceptions into what we really accept as a country. So even though we were able to see that there are a lot of negative things that are still happening, there's still the prevalence of the positivity and those people who are motivated and those people who are trying to prove the opposite. So I do have hope. I also hope that our our community and our generation and everybody that we're fighting with is patient and also doesn't give up. So as much as we see this hope and we, you know, advocate for it, I also hope that everybody remembers to also practice their resiliency and motivation for working towards it. So, kind of like, for example, when people are posting a lot of advocacy things on social media, when protests are going on, but then throughout the year, those social media posts die down. At the end of the day, yes, it's educational. Yes, it's informative. Yes, you probably reached somebody who didn't know that fact that you just reposted. But in the end, that's where it stays is Instagram or Twitter or whatever. People need to look more into how to make their voice count. And I think that we could definitely make some change.
Sam, I cannot thank you enough for being so genuine, you being so honest, and it's like you literally like you walk the walk and you talk the talk. Like
Mm.
it's it's amazing. Like I'm kind of speechless right now.
Thank you. Well, I have support from people like you, so it's definitely helpful. Um, definitely helpful. We are all a community, and we all like come in together to build each other up, no matter where we're at, because we're all here for the same reason.
Before I let you go, do you have what are your parting words, or do you have a message for maybe the youth who's like struggling with some of the stuff that you talked about, whether it's
Mhm.
abuse or their own coming out journey? What's your parting message for those people?
I would definitely say, in times where you're consistently doubting yourself or questioning the people in your life or questioning relationships, it's important to remember that at the end of the day, the biggest influence in your life will be you. And So knowing where you are now is really key in developing who you are going to be in the future. And like I said, nothing is ever linear. So sometimes we're going to have days where we feel like there's no hope, and other days we're going to feel on top of the world. And I think that's essentially what life is about, is that knowing that change is constant and adapting to it to where we are able to accept that. And the same goes with our identities, you know, even living in a society where it can be scary to be LGBTQ and a Black, Indigenous, or person of color. It can be very intimidating, and sometimes you can't see a way out. So I encourage people to think about who their sources of strength are. It could be, you know, a family member. It could be a school counselor. It could be a friend. It could be your dog. But identify what those sources of strength are, because in those moments of darkness when you don't know which way to go, those are going to be the driving factors to what motivates you to continue. And honestly, it isn't until you've reached that point of clarity and seen, you know, the obstacles you've surpassed, that you really see it for what it is, and you're like, wow, I did accomplish that. And everybody's like that. It's hard. We are our toughest critics, and so it's hard to see that. So, you know, in going through this journey, understand, you know, coming out, whether it's to yourself or other people, you know, that is a continual process, because it's a continual process of acceptance. And so that starts with yourself. So definitely start with yourself, and it'll expand into the outside world. Learning self-advocacy is definitely important, and being an LGBTQ person of color, naturally, one of our biggest skills could be to develop learning how to advocate for ourselves, because in that we know how to advocate for others.
I love how you mentioned the dog.
Yes.
Thank you so much,
Yes,
Sam.
we are inclusive here, all family members.
Thank you so much, Sam, for taking the
Yeah, thank you for having me.
initiative. You have a great rest of your day.
You as well.
Sam, Director of Equity and Inclusion. Did I get that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Yes. Awesome.
All
Have a
right.
great rest of your day, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you.